We grow up believing the economy is stable, predictable, and safe. But what if that's the biggest lie we're ever told? If markets are designed to grow, then why do the biggest crashes always reshape the world in ways no one explains? Why does every collapse seem to benefit the powerful, while everyone else is left with the bill? What if the economy isn't a steady machine at all, but a series of hidden resets that rewrite the global system each time? But every hero's journey begins the same way, with a disruption, a moment when the comfortable illusion of stability cracks and the truth begins to shine through. Our journey begins in 1929, not just with the crash itself, but with the shockwave that tore through the world's belief in the financial system. Stocks had been climbing for years. Newspapers celebrated a permanent prosperity. Ordinary people poured their savings into markets they barely understood. Politicians promised endless growth, and the public believed them. Because why wouldn't they? The world looked unstoppable. Then, suddenly, the floor gave way. Markets collapsed. Banks failed. Fortunes evaporated in days, and millions awoke to a world they didn't recognize anymore. But here's the part most people miss. The crash wasn't just destruction. It was an invitation to transformation. It was the first call to adventure, beckoning the global economy into a new era. Governments realized they couldn't stand back. Central banks saw an opportunity to expand their power. Economic rules that once seemed fixed became flexible. And within the ruins of the old world, leaders began crafting a new one. A world where the state played a central role in steering markets, managing money, and shaping the future. This wasn't a return to normal. It was the beginning of something entirely different. The world had stepped across the threshold unknowingly, pulled forward by crisis, guided by forces that understood that chaos is the perfect moment to rewrite the rules. The crash of 1929 wasn't just a tragedy. It was the call to adventure, not for one nation, but for the entire global economy. A signal that the age of unfettered markets was over, and a new era of centralized power had begun. And once the world answered that call, there was no going back. As the world staggered out of the wreckage of 1929, it believed the worst was over. But the hero's journey doesn't end with the call. That's only the beginning. The real transformation begins the moment you step into the unknown, crossing the threshold into a world that can never be undone. That threshold moment arrived in 1973. It didn't look like a financial crisis at first. There were no stock market crashes, no bank runs, no headlines about economic collapse. Instead, it began with something deceptively simple: oil. Overnight, the price of oil, the lifeblood of modern civilization, quadrupled. Gas stations turned into battlegrounds, factories slowed to a crawl. Inflation soared high enough to rewrite the meaning of money itself. And suddenly, nations realized how little control they truly had over their own economies. But while the public focused on the chaos, the real story was unfolding behind closed doors. This was the moment the global economy stepped across its threshold into a new world, a world defined not by production and industry, but by energy, currency, and geopolitics. Western leaders struck a historic deal with oil-rich nations. Oil would be priced exclusively in US dollars. In return, those dollars, billions of them, would flow back into Western banks and government bonds. This was the birth of the petrodollar system, and with it, the financial map of the world was redrawn. Suddenly, the US dollar wasn't just a currency, it became the foundation of global trade. Oil exporters became tied to Western financial institutions. Banks grew larger and more powerful than ever before, and governments realized they could sustain massive deficits and global influence simply by controlling the flow of money around the world. For ordinary people, 1973 meant rising prices, economic uncertainty, and a cost of living that would never fully return to what it once was. But for the architects of the new order, it was the ultimate passage into a redesigned global system. A system in which nations depended on the dollar, banks became central actors in world politics, and economic power was no longer determined by what a country produced, but by how its currency flowed. This was the crossing of the threshold, the moment the global economy left the old world behind and stepped into a new landscape of financial interdependence, currency dominance, and geopolitical leverage. A world built not on stability, but on control. And once that new system took hold, there was no returning to the simple industrial economy of the past. The hero, the global economy, had crossed into a new realm with new rules and new players shaping its fate. Then came the dot-com crash of 2000. A trial by fire for the digital age. Thousands of companies vanished overnight. Dreams died, fortunes evaporated. But this destruction cleared the field for a handful of survivors. Amazon, Google, Apple. Companies that would rise from the ashes to dominate the global economy for decades. Regulations tightened. Capital dried up for small innovators. The same internet that once promised decentralization became the foundation for corporate giants. Crises remove the small, empower the large, and reshape the very structure of the market. Then came the darkest moment in modern finance, 2008. The housing bubble burst. Banks collapsed. The global financial system stood at the edge of the abyss. This was the lowest point, not just for markets, but for the belief that the system worked. And in that darkness, governments acted, not to save homeowners, but to save the institutions that created the crisis. Trillions in bailouts rescued banks and investors, while ordinary people faced unemployment, foreclosure, and a decade of stagnant wages. But the crisis didn't end there. It transformed the world. Near-zero interest rates, quantitative easing, asset inflation, and a decade-long surge in wealth inequality. The hero, our global economy, did not die, but it came back changed. 2020 brought the revelation, the moment when the pattern became impossible to ignore. A pandemic triggered a market crash in weeks, and once again governments unleashed historic interventions. Tech companies exploded in size, billionaires multiplied, digital infrastructure became the backbone of modern life, and the line between government and market blurred further. This was the moment of clarity. Crises are not interruptions. They are catalysts. They clear the old world and make room for the new. Look across the century. After 1929, central banks became powerful. After 1973, the petrodollar ruled global trade. After 2000, big tech became unshakable. After 2008, central banks turned into market makers. After 2020, digital systems fused with the economy. Every crash is a transformation. Every collapse is a silent reset. The hero, the global economy, evolves through crisis, not through calm. Now we return to the present, armed with the knowledge most people never discover. Crashes aren't random. They're inflection points. They reshape power. They determine who rises and who falls. They rewrite the rules while the rest of the world is too busy trying to survive the fallout. You've completed the journey most people never take, seeing crisis not as chaos, but as strategy. So what do you do with this new understanding? First, remember that markets never return to normal. They evolve into a new order each time. Second, follow the power shifts. Ask who benefits, who consolidates, who rewrites the rules. Third, prepare for the next cycle, because another crash will come, and when it does, the world that emerges afterward will be shaped by those who saw the pattern and acted before everyone else. If this opened your eyes, hit subscribe. History isn't just stories, it's a roadmap, and I'll show you where it leads next.